I first found my grave when its mouth was open wide. It was nestled into the forest at the back of our property, hidden from the road which always served to shut out the sound of passing tractors. Dad used to say it helped Grandma sleep better. He told me that day that the plot had been in our family since his granddad was a boy, and seeing as I could only picture Great-Grandpa Jules as one of those mummies from the diagrams we hung in the library, I struggled to fathom how many of us were buried here. That confusion only deepened as Uncle Terry was lowered into his hole to join them. He'd always been so funny, sharing stories about his time in college. Years down the line, I would find his old school books all full of scribblings and signatures from classmates long gone, another man's plans drawn up years before and promptly buried away in the attic. Now he was just another headstone. Dad started teaching me how to care for the plots that same day. He was getting up in years himself, and I was old enough now to bike out once a week and clear away the markers. That's how I found my plot. A headstone sitting in the edge of the clearing, my birth date on proud and patient display, waiting for its twin to join alongside it. Dad's wasn't too far away, and it would find itself filled in 12 years' time. We didn't have much, a farmhouse and the property it sat on, as well as an old truck left to slowly rust in the gravel driveway. In time, I took possession of them and lowered the man who set me to this task into the earth. Being a gravekeeper at 20 was sobering. I was hesitant to explore our ancestral home when I knew all too well where I would end up if something went wrong. I had never really met anyone in town, so I was relying on myself. Not long after Dad passed, I debated moving the things from my room out into the rest of the house, but since I'd spent so little time there, it felt like a waste. Dad's room became another part of our vast memorial, and I returned to sowing the field and tending to my family. Each plot had specific wants and rituals to their upkeep. For some I left flowers, for others I read stories, but the worst was Grandfather. For him I delivered books from the library and read aloud a log of my work. Dad seemed to always shrink around him, a sharp-nosed man with thick bushy eyebrows and a scowl like a farmer's scythe. He lingered with us for a time, curating the library and barking orders through metal tubes that lined the halls like veins. He demanded the curtains remain drawn and the fireplace blazing. The shadows always scared me as they clung to the walls like sailors drowning in an oil-slick sea. When Dad failed to collect enough wood for the fire, or when the wind would batter the walls of our old house, Grandfather would deride him.
You never had to go to bed hungry, did you? Never had to sleep in a freezing shack, pup? I've worked myself to death for you, and the best you can do is sit here feeling sorry for yourself. Crying? I've kept you safe. I've kept you safe.
The house was like that for nearly 2 years, before the sun crept back through the curtains and we finally buried the old miser. His grave marker was not an elaborate marble headstone, but instead a wooden cross with a pale yellow ribbon tying it together, the belt of his nightgown. Dad always obsessed over keeping it clean. He would bring candles and disappear at all hours to attend to Grandfather's wishes. One night, several hours past my bedtime, I snuck out to follow him, only Fuck's sake. Hold on just. Okay. Again. He said nothing to me. He just stared up at the sky and wept. The instructions he left were clear. The house was to be kept dark. The bulbs in the fixtures that lined the halls had to be dim. The windows had to stay shrouded. I would sweep up when a storm raged through, and I would keep grandfather's study locked. I would collect provisions from the basement, the life's work of an auntie who could take none of it with her. Great Auntie Augustine hated orchids. When there were orchids placed over her plot, the winds would howl and the shutters would snap. A day's work would be spent repairing broken windows. If moss were to gather on Uncle Christopher's stone, I would find the pipes in the house backing up and flooding. Each plot had its own solution to my rebellions. I learned them. I learned the rules. I kept to them, and this was life for the better part of a decade. Quiet and continuous. Occasionally I would venture into town. I had never driven, so I would walk. A cart brought with me. I would pass by fields of milk-white eyes and unknown faces. Perhaps they knew of father or grandfather. On the louder, more riotous days, they would remind me why we kept the gate latched. I would not stay long, and I would always return to the plots. I even dreamt about the grave plots. Great open earthen mouths, gums of coarse soil. Staring up from deep within, the pale sky receding. Those dreams continued long after I was alone in the house. I kept after them. I was expected to keep the property maintained, keep the fence post from falling over, keep the flowers on the headstones. As winter gave way to spring and the rains continued and the land grew slick with mud, I stopped. Instead of taking books to grandfather one morning, I tore them off the shelves. Instead of a tidy report on the day's ledger, I screamed out a lifetime of transgressions. Instead of bringing flowers to my aunties, I brought a pickaxe. I would not have my bones entombed in a shabby box alongside the family who wore creases into my face and set me to work. I pictured each of them turning in their graves, clawing their dead fingers against coffin wood in a feeble attempt to force me to stay forever with them. I kept swinging and hacking at the tombstones until their shapes cracked under the weight. I swung until my aunts and uncles were rubble, until great-grandfather Jules's obelisk was toppled, until the dark clouds and far-off rumbling began to stalk closer. Towering thunderbolts backlit by white-hot flashes of lightning tore away at the trees. I knew the windows wouldn't hold even before their panes shattered across the old gray carpet. Torrents of rain chased me with howling winds not far behind. I burst through the front door of the house just as lightning flashed and revealed silhouettes of a dozen figures scattered across the parlor room, thin and towering, but thankfully slow-moving as they shook off the veil of an interrupted rest. Glass crunched under my foot, and I tore down the hall into the first door I could find. I only had a moment to take in the sparseness of Uncle Terry's bedroom before the lightning flashed again, and I heard heavy footfalls of a long-dead family growing closer. I pushed the old creaky bed in front of the door and hid in the closet, praying it would be enough to keep them out. Slam! A flat thud awoke me to a darkened room and the faint sound of rain. The water fell like dozens of hands tapping against the walls, prodding, feeling for their way inside. A rhythm from outside my door. I looked down to see an orange glow of a lamp and two pools of shadow breaking its path. They shifted.
He won't even speak to us. After a tantrum like that, he's gone quiet. I told you your son was a worthless pup.
I couldn't say anything. He was right. But he couldn't come inside. None of them could. He and my family shouted and cursed all night, but not one of them dared to open the closet door. I was the last person who could keep their memory alive, and they knew it. In the morning, I found the hall scarred and furniture splintered. Thin fingernail scratches crisscrossed the closet door. A branching Lichtenberg figure was burnt into the carpet, trailing out along the floor. I followed it into grandfather's study, its entrance now wide and inviting. I crept inside, 2 decades of scoldings ringing through my ears as I drew back the blinds and let sunlight flood my house. My house. In time, I would tear down the wallpaper. I would sell the books. I would clean out the rooms. I would fill in my grave plot. Terry's and Dad's stuff would come with me to the city, and everything else would be auctioned off. An Amish couple owns the estate now. I think they're putting up a barn this spring. As far as I'm concerned, it's their land now. I won't be visiting. Yeah, we'll probably go